He had jeans on, but the lower part was ripped.
Here we are.
And from what I could tell, he had dark skin. Here we are. He seemed normal at first glance. But then I noticed his arms. His arms were very long. His hands were almost to pass down his knees. His fingers were also very long and pointed, much longer than normal, and they had tips which looked like long nails or even claws.
Yeah.
The first thing on my mind was,
am I in it?
This thing isn't human.
I'm in it. This is...
And then I hear PFC Santiago say, "Sir, it's moving."
Share this with Jeff.
I did not expect what happened next. As soon as he said that, as I'm looking through this binocular, this thing, whatever it was, looked at me through the lens. It looked at me. It was unmistakable. He or it had its head now turned in my direction, and I could see it had white eyes, at least to the green. They looked white, like eye shine in a cat's eyes. I dropped the binoculars. Had it not been strapped to my wrist, it might have fallen straight through the grated flooring of the water tower. Ramirez looks at me, asking what I saw.
Yeah.
And all I could say was,
I just sent my buddy at work.
We're here.
I just shared the link with us. He might come in here.
Said, "Sir, orders."
And
my friend gave the order.
Watch this. I'm trying to get him this. He has a PlayStation.
I think the first shot hit its
and he plays Madden, and he's really good at it. And
through the valley.
I'm trying to get him. I'm like, you should stream your games. That'd be pretty cool.
And a corner where dying animals cried. Not sure how to describe it because it was the first time I had heard such a sound. But I am sure all of us heard it because of how loud the sound was. Santiago never got off the second shot. I don't know if he did so on purpose or if he was caught off guard by the scream. We then heard automatic rifle shots in the distance. Ramirez then tells us, "We gotta go." PFC Santiago went down the ladder first, followed by me, then Lieutenant Ramirez. Once we hit the bottom of the tower, we ran to this house. And these guys run fast, and Ramirez is having to drag me along so I don't get left behind. Honestly, I was very reluctant to be running where we were headed. I wasn't as hardcore as these scouts. I could barely even keep myself from wetting myself, right? One of the guys was still shooting in the direction towards the tree line when we got to the house. And near the front area was one of the soldiers sitting up against the wall. His buddy seemed to be applying first aid, and I saw that his left forearm now had a long, bloody gash, which was bleeding freely into the soil.
Yeah.
He reported to Ramirez that something jumped from the roof, landed right on top of him, right after PFC Santiago had shot. And while he didn't get a good look at the thing, his attacker, due to the darkness, he specifically refused to call the thing human. I noticed even his buddy seemed to indicate that he didn't think it was human at all. The other 4 soldiers come back over to us, saying that whatever this thing was,
let me think for a second. Let's see.
My friend decided to.
Let's see what
people in the house.
Hang on. Let's see what we have from Apple. We might be able to poison an arrow ourselves.
7 months pregnant. They were the ones who protected their local village official, who in turn
we could fire off on the Silver Knights, because that's what everybody's saying to do on Reddit is to poison arrow. Because I kind of, I don't know. I like I said, the first time I used the environment to my advantage. The first time, my first playthrough, because you see, you can stand in the middle, and their arrows will just hit the wall, and they won't go. They go through sometimes, but so. And I just took like arrows, because I have thousands of arrows, so I just did like, I was doing like 15 damage each time.
The rest of their platoon regarding the recent encounter, but they never mentioned anything about the man's description, nor the strange animal sounds that we heard. After working an all-nighter and making sure the cell site operation was stable, Ramirez and his men, minus the injured one,
can get close to him, that'd knock him off. But that's...
that I replaced into my car. Ramirez came to talk to me. At first he
What is
was
this?
joking around, saying I could probably enlist in the regular army now that I've had my first-hand experience of what it was like for them. And I went along with this, hoping to forget about the strange incident. But before I was able to drive away, he said, "Dude, Santiago, we saw the same thing you did. You know what it was, don't you?" I never responded, but inside, I knew what he was talking about.
I
The
can use
Ocelot,
these great
the creature
heavy
from
soul
Filipino
arrows.
folklore, the stuff of a Filipino child's nightmares. The description, the sound, it was the only thing that made sense, explaining what that thing was. During the Spanish era of 1500s, about 1890, these creatures were said to be once human, who were blessed by the moon priestess of old called Babelan. So these people could have power to fight the Spanish colonizers who had done them wrong. The Spaniards decided to persecute these priestesses for witchcraft, then spread tales that Asawangs attacked locals and foreigners alike. The Asawangs creature said to be able to
mask
shapeshift into either a
the
human
sight.
or an animal, but is never able to correctly imitate one or the other. As a human, it has leathery black skin and disproportionate limbs. As an animal, like a dog or a cat, for example, it's always black and 3 times its normal size. It can never speak or do animal calls. It can only growl, shout, or scream.
Yeah, that's it. So we're gonna have to get some poison arrows. So we're gonna have to go near Firelink Shrine
very ill people or pregnant women.
and talk to the
Like
female
one of this village.
undead
They can never
person.
be abused. And being an Aswang is hereditary. No one will turn if attacked by one, although the wounds they inflict can be fatal. This is, of course, all true if the folklore is to be believed.
Whoa.
I've never been back to the general area after this. First Lieutenant Ramirez and his whole team were recently dispatched south to deal with the ISIS terrorists there. Before he left, before writing this, I asked him about that night. It's hard to imagine a soldier of his caliber believing in those kinds of tales, and I find it even harder as
Are
I
you
write
ready
this,
to carry me back?
what I saw was real.
Yes.
But no matter how hard I try to come up with an explanation, I couldn't come up with anything else other than the legend passed down by our forefathers. One of the last things Ramirez said to me was, "I told you before, you and I both know what that thing was." And then he said, "I go with what I see. I don't have the luxury of time to doubt whatever is in front of me."
Anybody that watching
I don't know.
watching
That's all
this,
I've been
note
through.
to self: poison arrows. Buy all of those. I don't have any. It sucks. Now I gotta do this, or I can continue to try to get close to that archer and
speculate about what was seen by the scout rangers that night.
lure him off, make him fall off. What?
As indicated by the comments here, what's not up for debate is the conviction of many Filipinos who, to this day, maintain their belief in the existence of the Aswang. In fact, drawing on the South Legion such folklore, the CIA
I don't know if I have enough
efforts to combat
stamina
conflict among pup gorillas in the 1950s.
all the way.
An Aswang vampire attack
Maybe.
in order to rid the region of its
I'm
local
gonna
insurgency.
get the arrows. I don't have the arrows.
This operation
That's
was
our
a
mission.
resounding success.
That's
The
our
Huns,
mission.
coming upon the body of one of their own men, terrified to find his corpse completely drained of blood and with
Yes.
consistent bite marks on his neck, they practically fled the area overnight. In the modern era, certain rituals meant to ward off any malevolent Aswang are still prevalent, even when those who don't necessarily believe in their existence. For instance, the local body needs to be removed from a home following a pathway. It's advised far and wide, possibly attracting the attention of
I don't know which way it's out.
Likewise, the color red, symbolic of positive energy and fortune in Filipino culture, is commonly worn by young children and orphans as a sort of shield against any nearby malevolent forces. As for the Scout Rangers, from 2001 on, they continued to clash with various militant groups all over the southern region of their homeland. It was only in 2019, after nearly 51 years of constant fighting and over 100,000 lives lost, that peace is finally settled over Mindanao. While the major separatist groups expanded, small cells of radical Islamic, often affiliated with Al-Qaeda or the Islamic State, continued to fester in the remote region of the Philippines. And so, the Philippine Army elite First Scout Ranger Regiment continues to lead the charge in the jungle region, further building upon their renowned expertise in counter-terror operations. Whatever human enemy they might face, however, according to this ranger's testimony, it is far from being the most terrifying presence prowling the jungle. Hey guys, thanks for sticking around here for the after action credits. This episode was the first one exclusive podcast, and so I've had some time over the past few months before it actually became a YouTube episode to ask people that I've met, specifically those who are coming from the Philippines. I have several Filipino friends, and I've had the opportunity to bump into and meet several others in the last few months. All of them being originally from the Philippines, at least living some part of their childhood on or some other part of the Philippines. And the immediate question I had for them was, is it true that all Filipino children are told these kinds of stories or are at least aware of the Oswald and its existence? And unanimously, every single person I asked said yes. They all had this kind of very knowing look about them when I asked the question. So it just confirmed that it is a very well-known piece of folklore in the Filipino community, and at least some of the Filipinos that I talked to were, whether regardless of their religious background, were very insistent that these things are real, or that the people who have seen them are very adamant that do not go to these temples at night, regardless of whether you believe this or not. Just do not go to these temples kind of thing. So, obviously there's other very significant what these are, very vegetarian types, but yeah, very, very creepy. Again, it's one of those interesting things. You see a story and then you start to ask around, and it turns out that yes, it's just a creepypasta on the internet. These are real stories that people are telling based on their experiences. So, make of that what you will. Thank you for listening, thank you for watching, thank you for subscribing, for leaving a comment, a like. As always, a huge shout out to both my Patreon and YouTube supporters and anybody who supports the channel through purchasing a t-shirt, merchandise, something like that. Your support has gone a long way into helping build this channel into what it is. Thank you for the continued support. We are going to continue to work hard throughout this year to bring you even more content. With that being said, may God be with each and every one of you, no matter what you are dealing with. And I will see you in the next episode.
Yep. Okay, maybe this dude. Nope, that's not what I wanted to do. There we go. Okay, cool. We can't hurt him. Cool. Alright.
There you are.
Maybe he'll have something
As
for
promised,
me.
I will share my sorcery.
Yes, share them with me. Share your sorceries. Homing soul mass.
How do you sleep?
On a mattress from Mattress Firm. Get the nicest beds and I wanted an upgrade.
Yeah, but what's the range? What's
Get matched at Mattress Firm? Sleep at night.
Soul Spear? Magic weapon.
No response, eh?
Nope.
The story is about my Uncle Jimmy. Not that I doesn't tell it right, but I haven't heard it.
Oh, that was epic, because I didn't even mean to do that, and then it just worked out.
Story that sounded a little off.
Oh, man.
Now, my Uncle Jimmy was a second.
Oh, man. Get on.
My dad's side of the family was raised
You
in
know,
a rural
I wish it would let me
far away from
teabag
the
them.
city.
It don't-
This meant their
I
childhoods were spent raising farm animals
Can't
and living
do
off
that.
the land
No
in whatever
problem.
aspect they could. They,
That
of
was the
course,
best
had
part
electricity
about
and running
Halo. I
water.
know it's wrong
They
or
used it
whatever, but
sparingly so as not to rack up a large
Man.
bill that at the time they couldn't afford.
so much
Uncle
fun.
Jimmy was one of 7 kids in the household.
Really good.
He and my father were extremely close and a lot alike, but
We're gonna
my
get
dad
back to
turned 18 and
Halo.
graduated high school.
Halo
He
2.
left to go to a university a few states away, and he and Jimmy talked less and less in the years that followed. When it was Jimmy's turn to graduate and go off to college, he decided on a different course. He liked being out in the country and fending for himself. He said it made him feel like he was living the life God intended for him,
Wait a minute.
and that it made him
I
feel
went
closer
too
to
far.
the earth and ultimately to himself.
I went too
So
far.
when it was time for him to leave home, he did. He moved even further into the countryside. He found a cute small cabin in the middle of the woods with no power and no running water, and said to himself, this is perfect. My dad didn't see Jimmy much after that. He says he wasn't super comfortable visiting Jimmy in what he always called the boonies, where he'd have to endure no running water and no electricity for a few days just to visit his brother. And Jimmy absolutely refused to happen for years, until this specific incident occurred. I had just been born. It was the mid-'80s, and my dad was planning to ask Jimmy to come for a visit to meet his kid. He figured that he wouldn't come, but wanted to ask anyways. Now, it was hard to get a hold of Jimmy because of the whole off-the-grid thing that he had going on, so the best my dad could do was send a letter. The letter he got back shook him to his core. Now, the story goes like this. Jimmy had a dog, and boy, he loved this dog. Like the way a person loves and cherishes a child. It was a German short-haired pointer named Bessie. Bessie was a very well-trained and mannered hunting dog that went everywhere with Jimmy. Every night, Jimmy would let Bessie out of the cabin to run around for a bit before bringing her in at night.
It'd be cool if they had like a trade block for this game where you could trade your weapons and armor and stuff.
That night, after Bessie had been out for only about 30 minutes, he heard her scream. And not like a scream of excitement from playing or a scream to be let in. This was a scream of pure terror. Jimmy rushed to his door and barreled his way outside when someone's poor dog was making her way towards him.
Well, I
The
think
only simple look on her
this
face
is the
was one
crystal,
begging
so
to
it's
help her.
done.
I never understood that until I got my own dog and realized they were very capable of expressing their emotions just by the way they look at you. Jimmy scooped her up as carefully as possible and wrapped her inside. When he set her down, he realized that his hands were covered in blood. He began to fear the worst. He started to try to prepare himself for her timely and unfortunate death. It had to have been accidental. But when he checked her wounds, he was shocked and suddenly scared himself. Bessie had a large knife wound stretching across the back of her left leg. It was deep, but not so deep that she needed immediate medical attention. Jimmy figured that he could patch her up himself.
Oh,
If
man.
she had issues later on, he would take the 4-hour drive into town to the vet office. What really concerned me was the fact that he lived over an hour from the next person's house, and his dog had just been slashed by a knife. A person with a knife.
Oh,
He
there
closed
you
and
are.
locked all his
Where have
doors
you
and
been
windows
hiding?
that night,
I
and as
guess
much
you
as he
popped the
needed
twig
him,
for
there was
certain.
no way
Bah,
that he could fall
shows
asleep.
what I know. The next week went by without incident. Then the same the week after that. Until eventually he was comfortable letting Betsy out again, with his supervision, of course.
Yeah, nothing.
She had healed nicely, but still had a slight limp. As he was sitting on his porch one afternoon watching Betsy play in the small yard in front of his house, he spotted something in the forest. A silhouette of what looked to be a very large man, peeking out from behind a tree, watching his dog intently.
Oh.
Jimmy yelled at the man to show himself and loudly asked who he was and what he was doing there. But in one swift motion, the man moved deeper into the
What a
forest,
waste
where
of
Jimmy could no
time.
longer see
Go
him.
and fall off it.
He called Betsy in and, like he had done before, he closed and locked all of his doors and windows for the night. As he lay in bed, he heard a tapping on his window. Light taps. But Jimmy was a light sleeper, so it took almost nothing to wake him.
Oh, it's done.
He slowly turned his head to the side
It's
to look at his
done.
window, and between his two curtains, through a small slit in the fabric, lit by the moonlight, he saw an eye peering into his bedroom.
Perfect.
Thankfully, it wasn't looking at him at that moment, since he feared that the eye always was. But no. Instead, this eye was looking at Betsy,
Over here.
just as the man in the woods had done
I
during
don't
his
get
second
down
week.
there.
Jimmy kept his eyes locked on the mysterious person, and for hours he noticed this person never stopped staring at his dog. As night turned gray and the sun began peeking over the trees, Jimmy watched as the person moved to the window and listened as he made his way off of his deck and hopefully away from his property altogether. The next night, Jimmy made sure that his curtains were completely closed so nothing could see in or out. He didn't want to experience what had just happened the night before. This, unfortunately, only made things worse for him. He was woken up by a loud bang on his front door. That something or someone was trying its absolute best to make its way into his home. He didn't got what with him.
Oh my god.
Of course, he
This
suspected
weapon's
the same
nice.
person who had been stalking him the past month.
This
But he
weapon
always
is
made it very
nice.
clear that no matter how many guns or knives he had, he did not want to come face to face with this person if he didn't have to. He grabbed a shotgun, pointed it at the door, and very sternly and as confidently as possible, yelled towards the door, "Sir, I suggest you get off my property mighty quick. I have a shotgun pointed at the door, and I will shoot if you come into my house." The banging stopped, almost like the person was thinking about the warning. But it only stopped for a few seconds before it continued with even more force behind him. The door began to shake as it couldn't bear that much force against it, and Jimmy knew that it was about to break. He began screaming at the man to please just stop and leave, and that he didn't want to kill him. Betsy was going crazy, barking behind him for a second. It was like her barking fueled this intruder's anger. The door snapped, and through the broken pieces of wood, a hand reached through. Jimmy shot at the door with a force that knocked him back a few steps. The hand was gone. Jimmy stood in the same spot that he had landed in after the shot for a couple of minutes, and after composing himself, he slowly made his way toward the door that was now covered in blood. Only he didn't find a body on his porch like he was expecting.
Really close.
Instead, he saw a thick trail of blood leading into the forest. Jimmy had no phone to call the police, and the closest phone was an hour away at a small market. When the sun was up, he loaded Betsy into his truck and, locking up his house as best he could, headed off. He called the police from the market, and after waiting for about an hour for one to show up, he led them to his cabin. When they got there, Jimmy told them everything. They followed the trail of blood until they couldn't see it anymore, but they found nothing. They told Jimmy that they'd be opening up an investigation, but they told him that it was probably smart to stay with family, so they got it sorted out.
Well, that's cool. We're just gonna do it the other way
They were
then.
sure that the person was
Alright.
bound to show up at the hospital with a
Poison
gunshot
arrows off the table.
Jimmy,
We're gonna
stubborn man that he was,
roll, man. We're gonna duck and roll.
The nights were getting colder in those winter months, and he figured if the guy wasn't already dead, that he would be from the cold eventually. After the next
Duck
few
and
weeks,
roll.
Jimmy would hear
And this dude,
scratching
what's
on the
this
door at
dude
night.
doing? He could help me out, man.
He
I
would
give.
pick
I
up
have
scratch
some
marks
coin.
leaving in the wood on his door. And he swore that he would hear
I
whispers
have
outside his
coin,
window,
man.
saying his dog's tried to break in again, though, and although Jimmy was still freaked out, he didn't really feel threatened by this presence anymore. And in early January, 4 months after Betsy had been slashed by that knife, Jimmy woke up and made himself some coffee. He unlocked his front door and opened it, just about to take a step outside when there, leaning against
That's
one of the posts on
interesting,
his front
man.
porch,
That's
was the man.
interesting.
Only he wasn't moving.
Good idea.
He was making 0 attempts to get to Jimmy.
Good idea. And at least they could take some of the arrow hits or whatever.
He wasn't breathing either. This time he wasted no time in driving down to the market with Betsy to call the police. They showed up in droves and now surrounded the now crime scene. And it didn't take long to rule out Jimmy as a suspect when it was painfully obvious this man had died from being exposed to such freezing temperatures. It was also obviously the man that he had shot, since this person was missing several fingers on one of his hands. Jimmy had written back to my dad telling him all this, and at the end of the letter, also telling him that he'd be moving into our neighborhood in the next month. He'd already bought a house and was looking forward to spending more time with his family and getting out of the woods for a while. As I was growing up, I heard that story almost twice a year, every year, until Jimmy passed in the late 90s from lung cancer. He never married or had any kids of his own, but he always insisted that he didn't mind, since all of his siblings had so many kids that visited him all the time. Betsy passed when I was only 7 years old, and something in Jimmy died along with his dog. I can only hope that they're together again, best friends in life and death. My mom and dad had raised me and my brother in the same house throughout both of our childhoods. It's what some would call off the beaten path, and man, I hated it. Me and my brother both went to school in the city, and hearing about the lives all my friends had that I just couldn't relate to only made me angry about the life I lived. A life full of shoveling cow manure and slaughtering the animals I always got way too attached to. My brother never seemed to mind it, though. He was my dad's favorite, still is, especially after what happened. For context, this happened when I was 15 and my brother was about to turn 17. My dad had asked both of us to go on a hunting trip with them to hunt bear, and I had absolutely no intention on going until my mom told me that I had to. She knew I wasn't close with our dad, and she wanted that to change. She was hoping this trip would be the bonding experience we both needed. Unfortunately, I'm pretty stubborn, and having her make me go only made me hate it even more. It was a 5-day trip in the woods with my dad. He had a satellite phone in case of emergencies, and that was all the technology that was allowed. He thought it would be fun to build our own fires and catch our own food while we were out there. I was dreading it. The day came for us to leave, and the whole morning I was just begging my mom not to make me go. The begging did nothing, absolutely nothing, of course. I found myself walking behind my dad and brother only a couple of hours later. Thankfully, it wasn't too
Here's the
cold,
magic right
and I
here.
wouldn't have to cuddle my
Right
dad and brother for warmth like we had to do on our last hunting trip.
There it
That was
is. All
humiliating.
right.
It didn't take long for my dad to find bear dropping. I will say that even though I
Yeah, we're
hated
gonna quit the
hunting
game
and animals for days,
999
my dad's great.
times. They only give me 99 humanity, otherwise I would have lost millions of it by now.
My mom would cook up. We tracked the bear for the rest of the day, and by nightfall, we found a good enough clearing. My dad always insisted on sleeping in hammocks far off the ground so no predators could reach us. I didn't like it. My fear of heights didn't allow me to be comfortable enough to sleep like that high off the ground. It may have only been 12 or so feet, but still, it felt terrifying up there. I don't know what time it was when I began to hear the grunting. At first, I just thought it was my dad's insanely loud snoring, but something was different. It wasn't as loud and annoying as usual. It was more of a deep snarl of some sort. And as much as I didn't want to peek out of my hammock and look down, my curiosity got the better of me. I moved the fabric of my hammock only a few inches to the left, just enough for me me to see down onto our makeshift campsite. It was dark, but the fire was still somewhat lighting the area. I looked toward where the grunting noise was coming from and almost gasped when I saw a bear, bigger than any I'd ever seen before, standing on its hind legs, just under the hammock my brother was in. I felt my eyes widen as I started to panic. I didn't know what to do. Well, I did know what to do. I just didn't know how I was going to do it. I needed to wake up my dad. He would know what to do. I had brought a granola bar in my hammock with me, and I figured if I threw it hard enough, I would hit my dad with it, wake him up and distract the bear all at once. But the only problem was, I only had one chance.
We're gonna wait till we get to that area. I'll clear the enemies out, and then I'll drop the sign.
Hoping it would be enough to wake him. In the silence of the night, the sound of the granola bar hitting my dad sounded like a motorcycle starting up. Thankfully, it was enough to wake him. Only he woke up annoyed and loud. I shushed at him and pointed to the bear now making its way to the granola bar and falling to the ground. His eyes widened as he quickly looked back at me, realizing the dangerous situation we were in. All hopes of him saving us went away when he pointed to his gun leaning up against the tree on the ground beneath him. He threw something at my brother and quickly woke up, and it took a second to make him aware of the whole situation too. With all of us awake, we knew the only thing that we could do was wake down. And for hours, we sat in our hammock and waited as the bear stared at us, grunting and sniffing in our direction. My dad whispered that he was confused why I had begun climbing one of the trees to reach us, but of course, he was also thankful that it hadn't. Apparently it's a myth that bears can't climb trees, which only made me question my dad's hammock logic even more. I was grateful for them in that moment, though. Better to be up there than on the ground.
Once we get past this right here, the silver archers, the silver light archers, this is going to be, this, I think it'll be pretty smooth from there on. But like I said, I had difficulty with them the first time, and I just got away with it by just hitting them, but not being able to be hit by them. This time it's not working, and my bow's stronger too, so.
We're just hammock off of the tree and throw it on top of the bear.
Alright.
We could spend the rest of our lives.
Oh man, I got two of them.
So we did just that. My brother forcefully climbed out of his hammock and onto the branch. I cringed as he began to bend downward.
Okay, I got one of them.
And there he pulled on the hammock as hard as he could until it came loose. He then untied the other side and closed the tree. It all counted on a 3. My brother threw the hammock onto the bear. And I guess my dad thought going straight down was his best bet. He fell slightly on his impact, but the bear was somewhat distracted. It took only a few seconds for the bear to get the fabric weight in his face and nudge my dad to the ground. It felt like a target, but it didn't get far since my dad already had it in his sights and shot at it over and over again. Finally, it was done. That hunting trip was over. My dad used
now you're gonna bounce. Oh, you're gonna bounce. Okay, come on back now.
Like they usually do after he does.
Alright.
My mom wasn't happy about what happened and said my dad was a bit more responsible.
Wow.
My brother and I did so great for helping my dad bag a bear as big as that one. Apparently, it was the biggest he'd ever done. I didn't and still don't feel very brave though. I was just glad that I made it out of there alive. Thankfully now, my mom doesn't make me go on any more hunting trips with my dad. He doesn't mind though. That trip only made me closer with my brother, and he never asked me to go again. He tells everyone how my brother was a hero for throwing his hammock over the bear, and how I just sat there. It made me feel bad for a while, but I don't care, as long as I get to stay home during hunting.
Oh no, 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 no.
a good deal that we just couldn't pass up. My friend Julie and I were going to school about a half an hour away, and buying a house for the next 4 years actually turned out to be cheaper than the rent would have been at the end of it all. Plus, this meant no landlords, and we could do whatever we wanted with the place. The house was technically
Okay, so we'll just hang back this a moment here. Get out of the view.
Thankfully, the previous owners
See
agreed
what
to sell us
happens.
their solar panels as part of the overall price, which was actually super lucky. The house was also on septic, and we had a well, so even though it was off-grid, we still had all the luxuries of living in a house in the city.
Yeah, that would
Julie
be
and I
great
both
if I
had
could summon one of them to come up
and
here
I'm
and
not
help
ashamed
me.
to say that we both come from families who helped us with the mortgage from time to time. Anyways, the number one rule that I made with Julie when we agreed to buy this house together was that we wouldn't give our address to anyone in the family. No friends, no boyfriends, and especially no random guys. We were out in the middle of nowhere, and I didn't want to risk the wrong person knowing that we, two 22-year-old women, were living 30 minutes outside of town, miles from the next house. It just didn't seem smart to me. Julie always said that she was fine with the rule, and for the first year we lived together, and she respected it. At least, I think she did. Then one day, in our second year of being housemates, I came home to her making out with some random guy on the sofa in the living room. I was livid. I screamed at the guy to get out, which of course only made Julie mad, but I really didn't care. I had boundaries, and my reason for not wanting men over to the house seemed pretty fair. After he left, she yelled at me that I was being stupid and having a guy over from time to time wasn't going to do anything bad. I tried telling her that it just wasn't smart letting people we don't even know into our house and letting it be known that we live alone with basically no means to protect ourselves. But she still didn't get it. She just kept saying, "This isn't the movie Taken. A guy isn't going to come back and kidnap and sell us. Calm down. Live a little." Her making fun of the situation made me feel like I had made a huge mistake buying this house with the person I thought I knew so well. She'd been my best friend for 4 years, and I never got the impression that she would be so careless. I called my mom that night and told her what happened. She agreed with me that it was dumb of Julie to invite a guy over that she didn't even know. I also told her that it made me uncomfortable staying there, knowing this guy knew where we lived, who we were, and that we lived alone. I mean, it was obvious no guy lived with us. Every picture in the place was just two of us, and I'm pretty sure Julie probably told him that she only had one roommate. It wouldn't have been a shocker if she did. She brought him back to the house after all, so telling him about her life wouldn't have been a big deal. My mom told me that if I was uncomfortable, that I could just stay with her for a few nights, and if I wanted to go back after, then I could, and if not, I could stay however long I needed. I appreciated the offer and decided that I'd go to school the next day, go home, pack some things, and then head off to my mom's for a bit. Julie thought that I was being dramatic, but I didn't care. I went to school the next day as planned and made my way back to the house that afternoon. I decided to wait until Julie got home to let her know how long I'd be gone, and just to make sure that she locked up. Clearly, she wasn't the most responsible person, so I couldn't rely on her to secure the place after I left. At around 8 p.m., I decided I was done waiting and began making my way to the front door with my bag in hand. When I reached the hall that led into the living room, I stopped in my tracks. Thankfully, the darkness that filled the house hid me as I watched two men in black masks standing at the door behind the frosted glass. They were talking to each other when I heard one of them say, "I'm telling you, man, the girls who live here are all types of fine. I get the door open before they hear you." My heart sank and I didn't know what to do. I just had to hide. I guess now I realize that I probably should have slipped out the back door, but I really wasn't thinking. Instead, I slowly walked back into my room, shut and locked the door, and started trying to find some places to hide. I watched a movie the previous night that gave me the idea of opening my window to make it look as though I'd gone out that way, so I did that, and climbed into the back of my closet and hid under a couple of thick comforters I'd shoved back there after last winter. I heard the sound of the glass in the front door shattering. I felt tears beginning to stream down my face. I wasn't going to be one of those.
Alright, yeah, let's check the sign.
Shows you can't keep quiet though. I was barely breathing, so I wouldn't make a sound. I listened as they made their way through the house, loudly arguing with each other that they hadn't found us yet. I silenced my phone so I could give up my hiding spot or to go off, and I texted Julie not to come home. The people had broken into our house and to call 911 immediately. I also texted my mom and told her what was happening and for her to call 911 too. Of course, they both started blowing my phone, but when I heard the men try the handle to my bedroom door, I couldn't focus on anything but staying hidden and staying quiet. She's gotta be in here. The car's out front. I'm gonna be so pissed if she's not. You gotta be breaking this up for nothing. They argued back and forth like that for a couple of minutes until one of them must have gotten tired of it and kicked the door in. I was relieved when the window trick seemed to work and they screamed at each other that I got in the way. The relief only lasted a minute though when one of them told the other to look around for anything they could take that might have been worth something. I started praying that they wouldn't look too far into my closet, that they wouldn't pull back the comforters I was under and do the women whose houses they break into. I heard one of the men leave my room, but I could tell one of them stayed. I heard him begin to go through my drawers and throw things across the room. He seemed frustrated, which was probably due to the fact that I don't own super nice things. No expensive jewelry, nothing designer. I could never justify spending that kind of money, and clearly this guy didn't appreciate that. My breath stopped in my throat when I heard his footsteps get closer to the closet doors. I didn't move an inch. There was no way that I was going to give this guy any reason to believe I was in there. It felt like I was going to have a heart attack with doors. I could feel the vibrations of my moving things round off the shelves overhead and
Alright, so I know this.
grab hold of the blanket.
We don't need to go left. There's like something over there, an item or whatever, but I don't care what it is. Whatever.
Apparently they heard silence.
But we gotta get up to this guy. We gotta get up close to him.
I had every
And
intention of staying there all night.
look at the frequency he's firing
That
at
they
too.
were still there.
And he's gonna draw his
So I heard
sword,
my mom's voice calling for me from inside
and
the
then
house.
hopefully he'll jump
I tore
off.
the comforters off my body, and as quickly as I could, I ran toward my
Try
mom's
left.
voice.
No, don't
The
try
second I saw her,
Yeah,
I burst
try.
into tears. All the emotion I'd held in that whole time was being let out and couldn't control. I wish I could tell you that they found the men who broke in, but they didn't. They left behind no evidence, and the police didn't find anyone in the woods surrounding the house. The guy Julie brought over the previous night had a solid alibi too, so they ruled him out. He also denied telling anyone where we lived, but that's fine. I moved out the next day. It took a while, but Julie eventually agreed to take my name off the mortgage. One of our other friends moved in with her, moved back in with my parents. I feel safer with them. I just wish they'd caught the guys who terrorized
Bob and weave.
that night.
Man, that's all you can do sometimes, man. Like some punch out strategy. I appreciate that. Hopefully that ring of protection or whatever will help. Maybe it won't knock me back so far.
My husband and I are really outdoorsy kind.
So here we go.
Grew up in the city, and we decided to move anywhere smaller. Instead of honeymoon,
No, no.
we decided that it would be fun to get out of my comfort zone.
Yeah, sometimes
I wasn't too excited about
man
it,
can
considering
be
I was hoping for
his
a
own
lavish
worst enemy.
Hawaiian honeymoon or something similar.
So
But anytime with my husband was
there's too much Bob on that weave.
We drove from our home in Eastern Washington to a cabin a few hours away in Montana.
Oh man.
When
Hold
we got
on.
there,
This.
we were quickly made aware that there was no electricity in the cabin. There was running water, but no toilet. If we needed to go to the bathroom, we had to walk about 20 feet from the
I
cabin.
was
to the
doing
outside.
so good.
And I was quite upset, to say the least. When my husband said that we'd be staying in a cute house in the woods, I was expecting there were at least powers applied to the house. He swore the ad said nothing about there being no electricity, but I was so mad that I didn't even know if I should believe him or not. Maybe he thought that it would just be fun to go without while we were there. My husband was definitely the more adventurous type, and that wouldn't normally have been something that
I
would
hate
stop
that
him
mask.
place.
And that is.
We brought our bags to the door, and my husband pulled the key.
But I
from the
like
other
what it
back where
does.
The host said it to be.
I like
He opened the door and brought our bags inside. When we went to sit on the sofa, we noticed a very large binder sitting on the coffee table labeled Rules. My husband and I had stayed in plenty of vacation rentals and had only come across the actual physical rule book a handful of times. And when we had, they were usually only a page or two. When I say this rule book was a binder,
No, I have to mess
it was
with
a
these
literal
demons
binder.
again,
It was
man.
50 pages of very in-depth rules about staying in this house. My husband and I laughed it off and made quick comments about how it was a little strange, but we weren't going to let it stop us from having a good time. My husband set the binder back down, and only 10 seconds later, his phone chimed. It was a text from the host that read,
I think it's gonna work this
all
time.
the rules.
It's gonna
We
work.
honestly just thought it was a weird coincidence. We had just put the binder down without reading anything, and they texted us to make sure to read it. It was almost like they knew. That night, my husband went around the house lighting candles to give us some light, and he locked all the doors and windows, something we were accustomed to since living in the city. We left our bags in the living room and changed into our pajamas, and I begged for a bit of bed before blowing out the candles and going to sleep. The next day, we woke up in the living room and noticed our bags were
See,
open.
that was pretty
I
cool.
was sure that we had closed them
That wasn't too
before.
bad.
I looked everywhere for my sundress. I knew I passed it, but it wasn't there. When my husband joined me in the living room, I mentioned to him that our bags were open and we had closed them. He brushed off, but I probably left them open. I remember going, I knew that. I was wrong. My husband got himself a glass of water and sat down, setting his glass on the wood table in front of him. Another chime on the phone came seconds later. This time it simply read, Rule 5,
Right, okay.
page 3 of the binder. Always use a coaster when placing a glass on any surface. And this is when my husband and I started feeling extremely creeped out. How did they know we were using a coaster? How did they know it was something to drink? My husband texted back and asked if they were watching. They said no. They said they always remind guests of the coaster rule the morning after they arrive, since apparently that's when people are most likely to visit the table with a drink. We didn't really know what to think, but they had really great reviews, and we just chalked it up to another coincidence.
Well,
Thinking about it now, probably should have seen the writing on the wall and left, but my husband reassured me that everything was fine and that we should stay.
yeah, the knockback on those things is brutal, dude. Yeah, this is one of the most difficult parts I've had with the game. And I think the poison arrow. Now, I want to say it was from the fire keeper. That fire link, but she's gone now.
Headed off down the trail by the house. The hike was amazing.
So
It was so beautiful, and the water down at the lake was crystal clear. By mid-afternoon, we were ready to head back. When we got
that's
back to the
that.
house, my husband was about to unlock the door when
I haven't
he
seen
realized
any
that
poison
it was already
arrows.
unlocked. When he entered the kitchen, there was a note on the counter from the host that said that they had left us more towels and extra sheets, and that we would make sure all lovemaking was kept in the bedroom.
But even if I had some, I don't know if they'd work on them.
My husband told me to pack my bag and that we would leave. After we were
But I
back,
straight up
we
shoot them in the face with one of these arrows, one of these heavy arrows, and it's nothing.
They introduced themselves as the host. They wanted to know why we were leaving. This just confirmed it to us. These people had been watching us, and who knows what they had seen. The real shocker here was that this woman had shown up there.
Oh, that was a fail. That was a fail.
Stolen it from me and had the audacity to show up wearing it right in front of me. My husband had noticed too, and mentioned that, of course, they denied everything. When we were on the road after that, we contacted the vacation rental company and filed a complaint against the host. We also filed a report with the police. Unfortunately, the woman was somehow able to come up with a receipt for the dress, but apparently it was completely illegal for them to keep cameras up in their rental property. They had erased all footage from our stay, saying that it was customary to delete whatever was recorded after a certain
What?
stay had ended. This is the real reason they erased it. We complained about there being no palaces last week, and it being mentioned in the listing. The host actually supplied proof that the house did that it was mistakenly turned off for the duration of our stay. We feel like our whole honeymoon was ruined by this total invasion of our privacy, and we instantly stole the vacation rental sin. My husband did make it up to me, though, that he's lost the line so than I originally wanted. I was super grateful for it. The last time I checked out about the
Snap.
so I just feel really bad for that person.
Alright. Dude. Oh, we're doing it this time. We're doing it this time. I'm gonna break this game. I wanna break it. I'm gonna pull it out of the PlayStation and I'm gonna fight it. Look at that. What is that?
Carl never really thought much of his credit scores until he got a credit card.
You might as well go ahead and make sure that. Yeah. So the ring, oh my goodness, the ring that boosts against the physical attacks useless. Alright, let's try something else. Seal protection.
Start your contact today at PurdueGlobal.edu.
The story is not my mom and dad. It happened when they were newlyweds and had bought their first home together. My mom was so excited to be living on her own with my dad. They were both in their early 20s and she lived at home with their parents up until that point. The house they bought was more of a fixer-upper, but the style of home was exactly what my mother wanted. The location was exactly what my father wanted. It was more rural and in the country than my mother would have wanted.
Nope. Going up. Nope. Go up. Nope. Oh, shit!
Late August, and everything was great. The weather was still hot, but they knew cooler days were ahead with fall just around the corner. By early October, Mom and Dad had been hearing around town that storms were to be expected this time of year. By the sounds of it, they could get really bad. Heavy winds and rain. And one Thursday afternoon in late October, there was a weather warning for their area. They asked people in town what they were expected to do for a storm like that, and everyone said the same thing. Board up all doors and windows, and just in case, cut off all power.
Wow.
They didn't understand that part of it, but it really didn't matter anyway, since my dad was still in the process of getting a permit to run electricity to the house. The storm was coming very early the next day, and that night, both Mom and Dad spent hours boarding up all the doors and windows. By the time they finally finished, the storm had begun to roll in. They closed the front door behind them and sealed it from the inside as best they could and headed to their bedroom, their path lit by small candles that they were holding. My Mom and Dad waited most of the storm out in their bedroom, reading their books and playing board games. They had tried to sleep, but the noise of the wind and rain kept them up. At around 3 in the morning, the wind seemed to pick up. It was getting louder and louder, even making the house shake. They heard trees falling in the forest surrounding their house as they landed with a loud bang. The crunching and snapping of the branches had started to really scare my mom. She was worried about a tree possibly falling on the house and them not knowing when or where it would fall. They heard the sound of a tree breaking from its base for what seemed like the 100th time that night. Only this time, when it fell, they heard the crunching of metal, and their car alarm went off. Now, even if they wanted to, there really was no escaping that storm. Not by car, anyways. Then it happened. A tree fell right into their bedroom. Debris was flying everywhere, and the force of it falling launched my mom back several feet. It was pitch black apart from the occasional lightning strike lighting up what was left of the bedroom walls. My mom was scared and confused as she called out my father's name. Wind and rain whipped through the now gaping hole in what was once their safe haven. My mother's face was covered in her wet hair, and she tried desperately to move it out of her eyes so they could find my father. He wasn't responding to her shout for him to come to her. My mom had begun to believe the tree may have crushed him. The grief she felt in that moment was immense, until she heard a groan come from next to the fallen tree. There on the floor next to the bed was my father. His arm was wedged under the tree, and he was almost being drowned by the downpour of rain on his My mother grabbed a nearby raincoat that used to be in the now torn-apart closet and shielded both of their faces. She couldn't exactly tell because of everything going on around them, but my father was losing blood fast. He was completely out of it and didn't really know what was going on or what had just happened. He kept asking my mother to help him over and over again, and she had to tell him that he was stuck and that they had to wait for help to come. They had no power, so no landline, and this was the time before cell phone, and my mom felt hopeless. She thought that she was going to lose the man she loved. She had only one option. It was a fleeting thought in her mind that only lasted a second, but it was brought to life when my father thought of the same thing and told her to do it. He was starting to gain full awareness now, but thankfully his body was in enough shock to ensure that he felt no pain. He told her that she had to get to the neighbor's house and try to call for help, but my mother told him that there was no way that she could leave him. She could never forgive herself if she left him and came back to his lifeless body where he would have died alone. So instead he suggested what she was silently thinking. They needed to cut off his arm. The seconds felt like hours in the time that passed after he suggested something that she wasn't so prepared to do. He kept reassuring her that everything would be all right. He instructed her to get his axe from next to the bed. He had kept it there in case of intruders during the night. Then he told her to tie something very tight to the top of his arm to decrease the blood flow to the area. My mother had told me multiple times that moment was the scariest moment of her entire life. Scarier than childbirth, and way scarier than being a first-time mother. She lifted the axe and he begged her not to hesitate. Hesitation would only possibly result in more injury for him and even maybe for herself. He slowly counted to 3, and as the wind and rain seemed to slow in that 1 second, she drove the axe down into his arm. He screamed, and she cried when she realized that it hadn't gone all the way through. She was now certain that she may have given him his death sentence, but my father was as calm as he could have been in that situation and told her to go again. She was scared, and it was taking her a second to compose herself, but she didn't have a second. He told her that she needed to do it immediately or he wasn't going to have a chance. She lifted it once more, and in one more blow, he was free. She grabbed a nearby shirt that was relatively dry and wrapped it around the stump that now replaced his arm. They both, holding on to one another, climbed over the now broken pieces of debris that was once their house and began making their way down the long driveway to hopefully reach their neighbor's house in time to get some help. My father had begun leaning against my mother for support as he continued to lose blood. The mud was basically just slopped and slowed them down in a situation where they needed to go as quickly as possible. By the time they reached the bottom of the driveway, my father had begun to go limp, and my mother was practically carrying him, dragging him. She wasn't ready to give up as she begged him not to. A point came where she finally couldn't carry him any longer. She laid him down under a tree in a spot she thought was drier than the rest, and slowly and sadly said her goodbyes to the man that she thought she would grow old with. He was conscious enough to let her know that he loved her and that he would always be with her even if it wasn't in person. Early morning came and the storm died down. My mother was found on the side of the road when their neighbors were driving into town. She was still clutching onto my father and crying into his chest. Police were called, but of course, nothing could be done to save my father. My mother never really fully moved on from his death and how traumatic the whole night had been. She found out that she was pregnant with me only a month later, and she always said that I'm the greatest reminder of the man she loved so deeply. She hasn't remarried, and I've only heard this story once when she thought I was finally old enough to understand why my father had never been in my life, and what happened to him. It's too traumatic for her to think about. Our house is still full of pictures of them together, and every year we celebrate his birthday. And of course, I feel for her. I can't imagine how hard it must have been to start a life with someone, only to have it torn away from you so quickly. 20s now, but the story I'm about to tell you takes place when I was 12 and my brother was 14. We lived with our parents in a small cottage in the countryside. We had no electricity, only had running water in the warmer months from our gravity-fed hoses off the seasonal creek. Most people probably would have hated it, but when you're raised in it and know nothing else, you have no reason to dislike it. I didn't know a lot about the world outside of our property. My dad hunted, and that is how we got most of our meat. And my mom grew a huge garden from spring to early fall. We also raised pigs, chickens, goats, and had a dairy cow named Della. My mom canned all the excess food throughout the year, so when winter came, we would have plenty to eat and live off of. She cooked on our wood stove even during the warmer months, and she homeschooled us and taught my brother and I everything we know. One fall, it was exceptionally stormy, and my mom had told me to go milk the goats. I was mad about it since it was early in the morning and all I wanted to do was sleep, but she was adamant that I help out. Apparently, she'd been up all night trying to secure the animals' pens. Our dad had been away on a hunting trip for a week at that point. I slowly and sluggishly made my way outside, and to get to the goat stalls, you had to pass by the pig pens. They had their own little structure out there that kept them out of the wind and rain in the early mornings. My mom would let them out. Only this time, when I walked by the pig pen, I noticed one of our pigs, Chunky, wasn't there. I climbed over the fence into the pen and made my way into their small structure. I saw Kareen and Freudis cuddling like they usually do, but no Chunky in sight. I started panicking a little since Chunky had always been my favorite. I ran back up to the house and asked my mom if she'd seen Chunky this morning. She told me that when she let the pigs out only a couple of hours before, Chunky was with them. I told her she was missing, but my mom wasn't really worried. Chunky was a troublemaker who got out from time to time, but she always came back. And we treated her really well, and she knew where her home was. She was actually very smart. I told my mom I was worried and that I was going to go around the property looking for her once I was done milking the goats. And the whole time that I was milking them, all I could think of was Chunky out somewhere in the property, alone, wet and cold. After about an hour of milking the goats, I was finally done. I brought the milk to my mom and kissed her cheek before making my way back outside in my rubber boots and raincoat. I spent the rest of that day looking for Chunky, but I just couldn't find her. My brother Tony even came out to help me look, but he didn't like the pigs so much, so he gave up after joining the search for about an hour. As it got dark, my mom told me to come inside. I hated not knowing where she was. My mom kept reassuring me that Chunky was okay and that she'd probably be back by morning, but I knew that there was something wrong. I didn't sleep much that night, and the second the sun peeked through my curtains, I was up and out the door. I didn't make it very far before screaming at the sight in front of me. There on the front lawn was Chunky's lifeless body, torn to shreds by some animal. I fell to the ground in tears as my mom and brother ran outside to see what was going on, and I couldn't take my eyes off her as I sobbed. That whole day, all I could think about was Chunky and how she didn't deserve to die that way. My mom was more concerned about the fact that one of her animals had been attacked so close to home. She knew it meant that whatever had done this would probably be back for more now that it knew that it was somewhere to find something to eat. For the next week, we kept our animals in their houses. It worked for a bit until one morning we woke up again to one of our goat stalls torn open by something, and all 4 goats dead. My mom wouldn't let me know what it had done, but by the look on my brother's face when he came back from helping Mom clean up, I knew that it was bad. My dad came home a few days after the goat incident, and he helped to secure the other structures and stalls as best he could. We were hoping that that would deter whatever was attacking our animals, but of course it didn't. Next, our whole flock of chickens was massacred. It was a bloodbath in their coop. We had no idea what was taking the lives of our animals, but we had no choice but to figure it out. This wasn't just our pets it was eating. This was also our source of food, and we couldn't just keep letting it kill our animals. My dad and brother decided that night that they'd sit up in the hunting blind by the goat stalls, and hopefully they'd see whatever it was that was preying on our animals at night. Unfortunately for them, what they weren't expecting to see was a very large mountain lion making its way onto the property. My brother told me the second our dad saw it, he threw his hand over both their mouths to not make a sound. You see, mountain lions are very good at something that my dad hadn't counted on: climbing trees. Of course, in the moment of panic, my brother gasped and the mountain lion locked eyes on the both of them. My dad had his rifle in his hand, and although he didn't revel in the thought of killing this creature, in that moment, he knew that he would have to do it. My brother started to cry out of fear, even though he was trying his absolute best not to. He'd never been in a situation like that, and he just couldn't hold his emotions in at all. In one quick motion, the mountain lion sprang onto the base of the tree and quickly started climbing its way up toward my father and brother. And that's when my mom and I heard the screaming. We rushed out into the porch, but it being the middle of the night meant that we couldn't see anything. Only hear the screams of pure terror coming from my brother, then the gunshot, and a thump. My mother began running towards the tree that she knew that they were in, but we heard my dad call out to us to go back inside and shut the door. After around 10 minutes, they came inside, and my dad told us what had happened. As the mountain lion was making its way up the tree toward them, my dad knew that he had one chance to shoot it before it reached them. His eyes had acclimated to the low light, and with only light from the moon to help him, he made the shot. And he watched as the big cat fell to the ground with a loud thump. He told my mom and I to go back inside in case it hadn't killed it, and he was worried that maybe it had enough fight left in it that if it saw my mom and I, that maybe it would come for us next. But by the time he and my brother climbed down the tree, he knew it was dead. Straight shot between the eyes. The next morning he reported the killing and animal attacks to local authorities and game management, who came by and collected the mountain lion. After that, we didn't have any more problems with large predators except for the occasional chicken being killed by a hawk. I moved off the farm when I was 20, but not too far away. I visit often with my husband and daughter, and about once a year, my dad just loves to tell the story about how he saved my brother's life. I'm a 38-year-old female, and I live with my husband and 4-year-old son. We decided that we wanted to live off the grid about a year after our son was born. The world's been going in a weird direction, and cutting ourselves off from it seemed like a good idea at the time. We bought a small house in the forests of the Pacific Northwest, and apart from the story I'm about to tell you, we loved every second of it. We have a family dairy cow that produces a lot of milk. About 6 to 7 gallons a day, which is way more than a family of 3 can drink. More than anyone can drink in a day, actually, but where we live, people love to drink raw, unprocessed milk. It's a controversial topic that I won't get into right now, but with the excess milk we constantly have, my husband suggested that we post a Craigslist ad to barter our milk. You know, trade the milk for other items we may need or want, like fresh fruits and veggies or farm equipment. We figured it couldn't hurt, and that it would be fun to meet new like-minded people in the process. We posted our ad, and we didn't get any responses for a while. I started feeling a little defeated about the whole thing, and that's when I got an email from a woman named Christina. She told me that she absolutely would love to trade for some milk, and I won't lie when I say that I was a little excited too. We emailed back and forth for a couple of days, and she told me that she grew organic berries that she would want to trade. I thought everything was going great until she suddenly just stopped emailing back. I emailed her again 4 days later to ask if she got my emails, but again, got no response. It was like she was purposefully ignoring me, but my husband told me that sometimes people get busy and I shouldn't take it personally, so I didn't. I moved on and continued to wait for another person to see the ad. Over a week and a half later, I finally got a response from Christina. She was angry that I had emailed her in the middle of the night, and it was my fault that she hadn't seen it. She said that it was very irresponsible of me to email so late, and that it wasn't a good way to run a business. And I was shocked. I looked over my previous emails to her and was confused when I saw that I, in fact, hadn't emailed her in the middle of the night, but in the afternoon. And I didn't understand her comment about this not being a good way to run a business, because I wasn't running a business. It was a Craigslist ad. I chose not to respond to her because of her obvious problem with me and her incapability to take responsibility for her own actions. I thought ignoring her would have meant that I'd be done with the situation. I was wrong. Instead, she continued to email me multiple times a day for the next 2 days, reminding me of her emails and telling me to email her back. Finally, 2 days later, she wrote to me once again, this time saying something that genuinely terrified me. She said that she was tired of me ghosting her. She was offended and was very angry that I would do that to a sweet old lady like her, and that if I wasn't going to give her the milk, she was just going to take it herself. I didn't really understand what she meant by that. Was she going to find where we lived and milk our cow? I showed my husband and we laughed about it together, and again, I didn't email her back. Why would I? Clearly this woman had some serious issues. That night we heard rustling outside of her house, but that was something that we were used to. There were lots of animals in the area that weren't afraid to come up to the house throughout the night. Our son came into our room really early in the morning and swore to us that he was hearing footsteps outside of his window. My husband and I tried to reassure him that it was probably just a deer, but he was sure that it sounded like a person or monster walking back and forth just outside his window. He was scared, so we let him sleep in our bed until it was time to wake up. That morning, my husband went outside to check for footsteps, and to our surprise, he actually found some. Whoever it was wore a very small-sized shoe and definitely was pacing all night based on the deep footprints that went back and forth in the mud outside his window. It's pretty strange seeing footsteps outside our house that aren't ours. We live so far outside of town and own the property surrounding our house, 30 acres of it. My husband searched the forest surrounding our house but found nothing. When I went out to milk our cow, I was horrified to find her covered in black spray paint. Her back was littered with it. When my husband came out to help me, he was just as shocked as I was. I still had to milk her though, and honestly I felt a little bad doing it. Cows are very sensitive animals, and I could tell that she was scared and probably in shock just as much as we were. Only when I went to milk her and was massaging her udder, I noticed her bag seemed a little small, almost like how it feels after being milked. Then, when I went to clear her teats of the first few squeezes of milk, there was almost nothing coming out. Someone had literally milked our cow, and sometime throughout the night also spray painted her back. I thought back to the crazy email the woman had left, and I knew it had to have been her. We knew no one else would do something like this. While my husband and I were trying to clean off her back, we heard our son scream from inside the house. We both dropped what we were doing, and when we got inside, we saw a jug of milk on the counter and muddy footprints leading to our son's room. We rushed to his bedroom door, and when we looked inside, we saw a woman sitting on our son's bed with him on her lap. She was holding him tightly, smiling at us with this eerily emotionless look on her face as he squirmed in her grasp. I was going to tell her to let him go, but my husband had other plans. He'd always been the no-nonsense kind of guy, and so he just walked right up to her and punched her in the face. She let go of our son as she brought her hand up to her nose, and my husband took the opportunity to grab him and pull him away from her. He grabbed my arm on the way out of the room and led us out of the house and put us in his trunk and locked it. He went back inside, and the next thing I knew, he was physically carrying this woman out of the house and forcing her to sit on the porch. Every time she tried to get up, he just shoved her right back down. She was no match for him. He made sure that there was no way she was leaving. I had already called the police the second we were in the truck, and they arrived about 30 minutes later. While we waited for them, the woman only said one thing: "You shouldn't have ignored me." husband does everything for our family. If we didn't have him, there's no way our children and I would have survived out here by ourselves. For context, my husband leaves for a few months out of the year to work on the railroads while my children and I stay on the farm taking care of all of our animals and tending our garden. When my husband comes back, it is honestly such a relief since he's able to do work on the more hands-on, bigger projects around the property. Well, our family had been lacking something for the first year on the property. We have no water running to the shed that we currently live in. Yes, shed. We converted a 12 by 30 foot shed into a small cabin for the kids, my husband and I. It's fine. It does the trick. Keeps us dry during the wet months and keeps us warm during the cold months. But what has always bothered me has been the lack of a toilet. For the first year, we'd literally just been going out in the woods with a roll of biodegradable toilet paper, and I was so sick of it. Ever tried getting a 2-year-old to go to the bathroom where everything around them has their attention and not you? It's impossible. So to remedy this situation, I asked my very handy husband to build us an outhouse. Nothing fancy, just a small building where we could go to the bathroom in peace. He was absolutely on board and positive that he could do it. Our shed, fortunately, had electricity powered by our diesel generator just outside, so my husband spent a whole week researching exactly what he needed to build the outhouse and how he was going to do it. He even bought a new, very expensive chainsaw, just so he could cut down one of our trees himself to use the wood. I didn't really like the sound of that since I thought it sounded dangerous, but he was so sure that he could do it because he loved to remind me that he's cut down plenty of trees before, so this time shouldn't be a problem. I decided to trust that he knew what he was doing. The day came for him to cut down the tree, and to say that I was nervous would have been an understatement. I stayed in the shed with our daughters and patiently waited for him to come inside and tell me that the tree was down and that it was done and over with. I heard his chainsaw roar to life and the awful sound of it cutting through the wood. I took comfort in knowing that one of our neighbors had come by to help him, so at least he wouldn't be alone. The loud thump of the tree heightened my anxiety for a second, and when I looked out the window and saw the big smile on my husband's face and the thumbs up, I knew it was okay. I decided to stand out on the small porch just outside the door of our shed to watch him chop it down. For about an hour, everything seemed to be going fine. Now, I know nothing about chainsaws or cutting down trees, so I can only describe to you what I saw in the way that I saw it. My husband and our neighbor were both chopping up the tree on different ends when I noticed my husband was having a hard time getting through this specific part of the tree, more towards what used to be the bottom of the trunk. I watched in horror as I saw him prop his leg up onto the trunk of the tree to get more leverage, and I screamed at him to stop. Of course, they couldn't hear me since both my husband and our neighbor were wearing ear protection. I started running towards them to hopefully stop my husband from possibly hurting himself, but there was nothing I could do. I was at least 100 feet away, and I just wasn't fast enough. As I was running and screaming for my husband to stop, I watched him place the chainsaw against the bark once more. Only this time, when he kicked back, there wasn't just an open space for it to go into. There was his leg. The chain ripped through his shin, and blood immediately sprayed and oozed from the wound. He screamed in pain and threw the chainsaw to the ground. Our neighbor just looked at us with wide eyes, and I screamed at him to get help. I rushed to my husband's side, and I honestly had no idea what to do. I was panicking, he was panicking, and it was pure chaos. I looked at his leg, and through all the blood, I could just see mangled flesh. My husband had begun to scream. There was literally no stopping the wailing coming from his mouth, and I wasn't going to ask him to stop. I could only imagine the fear and pain that he must have been feeling. I thought for a second and remembered a YouTube video that I had watched on how to make a tourniquet out of a piece of your clothing without thinking twice. I used a knife to cut a piece of cloth from my flannel. I positioned it above the wound on my husband's leg and tied it tight. I used a nearby stick and tied it to the piece of cloth and twisted it over and over as tightly as possible to hopefully cut off blood circulation to the lower half of his leg. He'd already lost so much blood, and I was scared when I realized his screams got quieter with each breath that he took. Our neighbor came back with his wife, and she was carrying what looked to be a first aid kit. They informed us that they had called 911, and an ambulance was on its way, but wouldn't be there for another 30 possibly 45 minutes. And the number one thing they said to
That
do
poor
was
guy.
to make sure it bled as little as possible. From what I could tell, the tourniquet I had made was working, but my husband wasn't doing any better. His spirit had stopped and he was finally able to talk. He said that he felt numb and his body was cold. We brought him blankets and all I
Hey,
could
I'm
do was
back.
sit with him and wait
Look
for
at
the
that.
ambulance to get there. He was telling me over and over again how scared he was, and I was trying to be brave for him, but my God, I was terrified. I needed him. Our kids needed him, and I should have never let him cut up that tree. Wind had started to roll in, and dirt started getting in the wound. I didn't really know what to do, but it seemed like a good idea at the time to at least cover his leg with something. I grabbed a clean towel from the shed and told him to brace himself for me to place it on his leg. I very gently wrapped the towel around what was left lower portion of his leg. Surprisingly, he said that he didn't feel much down there anymore. His face became white, and he got colder and colder. By the time the ambulance arrived, he had been in and out of consciousness for about 10 minutes. I called my mom to come pick up the kids, and our neighbors watched them until she got there. I rode with my husband to the hospital. He had lost so much blood, and at first, doctors weren't sure if he was going to make it. They did end up having to amputate his leg below the knee. Unfortunately, he developed an infection post-surgery and needed a second amputation 2 weeks later.
Man, that food's so good, man. I want some more, but I don't need to eat anymore.
He thought life as he knew it
Oh
was
my
over.
goodness.
To him, his purpose in life was doing activities he thought he could no longer do without
Why are
his
you
leg.
killing? I'm watching a phantom kill
But is doing much better.
the guy on the wall.
He's determined to do everything he once did before the accident, and for now, we're staying with my mother in the city while he heals. I'm just glad that day didn't end with the loss of my husband and my children's father.
Connection, opportunity, possibility. It's what we all want. Spectrum has built a world where anything's possible, with products and services designed to work better together for a seamless connectivity experience. A connection to family and friends, a connection to education, and a connection to new opportunities. So there's no limit to how big we can dream. That's life unlimited. That's Spectrum.
Spectrum. Fuck Spectrum. Oh man, see, I'm trying not to cuss on the stream, but yeah,
grew
I
up in
did.
this little place called Pruitt
Whoops.
in northern
Whoops.
Arkansas. Growing up, all my friends lived down in Jasper, so if I
I
wanted
probably
to see
shouldn't
them,
be smoking
my
a
mom
bowl
and dad
either,
used to
but
drive me
whatever.
down there for play dates. When I was old enough, I'd ride my bicycle down there, but our bikes also
It's
gave us
legal
the
here,
freedom to explore
dude.
for miles and miles in every direction. And that's how we rediscovered Dog Patch. Dog Patch is this abandoned amusement park up in a place called Marble Falls. It closed sometime when I was a kid, and I remember visiting when it was still in business, but we just kind of forgot about it over time until we rediscovered it one day while out riding our bikes. It definitely wasn't your typical amusement park.
Shit, time to
There were
light
no
the
roller
bonfire.
coasters or anything like that, and I think the owners were going for a more wilderness camp kind of feel to the whole
We're gonna
thing.
kindle it. I'm
I remember
gonna
there
kindle it
being a big
with
water
my
slide.
humanity.
It wasn't so wet when we started hanging out there. A bunch of abandoned log cabins with these big red brick chimneys. It definitely wasn't a safe place to be hanging out, but I think that just made us want to hang out there all the more. And now we did, for almost 4 years. And each summer, Mother Nature claimed more and more of the park until it was as wild as we were. I spent some of the best days of my childhood in that old abandoned theme park, but for reasons that have become obvious, those memories are all tainted for me now. I know that's something I need to work through, but it's difficult to prevent what I'm about to tell you from bleeding through. Like I said, I spent most of the happiest times of my teenage years at the Dog Patch, but I also endured the worst few moments of my entire life there too. The third summer we spent hanging out in the Dog Patch marked a big change for me and my buddies, and it was one I'd never expected. In Pruitt, there was a family that had a real bad reputation. They were real poor. so I guess it wasn't their fault in a lot of ways. But they for sure seemed like they were crazy mean to their kid Noah. Noah was real weird too. I remember one time in middle school, all the kids started pointing and laughing at him because he was eating cat food for lunch. You'd think that'd shame him into throwing it away, or at least trying to hide it or something.
Wow, I feel so
Noah
much
didn't seem to
better.
care.
I always
He was
feel
so
good
hungry that he
eating.
didn't care if people were laughing or he just couldn't hear it. There were a bunch of wild rumors flying around about his family too. Some saying that they were all on drugs.
I like making
Some saying that they were serial killers,
French fries
manufacturers.
and tossing
My
them in
parents
Cajun
told me to stay away
seasoning. That's
from
pretty
their
good.
place, and they didn't even have a bad word to say about anyone. Noah was a real loner, and we didn't figure that was by choice either. He didn't hang out anywhere we knew of. Noah didn't have any friends, and we never saw him outside of school. So imagine our surprise one day when we sneak onto the
They don't like us eating the brownies, so I don't take the brownies anymore, which is probably a good thing, because that was one of my favorite things. What I like to do is I like to heat it up in the microwave and put peanut butter on top of it, and that is just like the best thing in the world to me.
Seeing Noah out in the wild like that was like seeing Bigfoot or something. And while we didn't exactly want to chase him off of our territory, we weren't too keen on hanging out with the mine and even approaching him. He pulled something out of his pocket, put it between his lips, and said,
So that one ring is useless. These rings are useless. We're gonna do the poor pudding ring.
We were all pretty much freshly 14 at that time. Where we lived was still very, very conservative, so the idea of anyone our age smoking and drinking was pretty wild. I think Noah knew we were staring. Maybe that's why he lit up in the first place, to get a reaction out of us. Either way, it worked. One of my buddies steps forward and then calls over to Noah, asking if it really was a cigarette. That's the kind of state of disbelief we were in. But Noah was definitely weird enough for us to think he was just pretending to smoke with a piece of rolled up newspaper or something. Noah then invited us to come over and see for ourselves. Then lo and behold, he is actually smoking a cigarette. That wasn't even the craziest thing though, because when we asked where he got it, it was out the whole unopened pack. Tells us that his grandma bought it for him. We immediately called bull crap on that, but Noah says he can prove it by bringing us all an open pack of cigarettes the next day. We obviously didn't believe him, but the next day, he showed up with a whole bunch of packs, along with a little flask of whiskey for us to try. We still didn't believe that he was just getting the stuff off of his grandma. We were convinced that he was stealing it from somewhere. But as time went on, we started actually believing him. Slowly but surely, over the course of a few weeks,
This is it. This is the part we have to get past this. This is like one of those. Oh man. Dude, I was blocking.
But if you can be distant from the conflict, he was actually a pretty fun person to hang out with. He even brought up that whole cat food incident in middle school. I would just laugh it off, saying it was all just an adult reaction. Before adding this cat food, it wasn't that bad. I honestly couldn't tell if it was serious.
These things have never given me this much trouble. Man, the first playthrough, I just come through and I just wipe these things out. This is serious. Wow. Wow. Okay.
But then the time finally came, with curiosity
Let's
outweighed
go.
our apathy. We started probing. The moment we started bringing along some old
I rolled into it.
as he was working for ages, it was finally asked if it was his grandma who was getting stuff to him. No one said so. Like it was the most
What can we
normal thing in
do
the world.
to
At the same time, we found out that he didn't actually live with his parents, but rather with his grandma in some rundown old trailer. That didn't exactly take us by surprise, but what we all really wanted to know by that point was, why did his grandma buy him booze and smokes, or more accurately, why didn't she see anything wrong with it? I didn't know what kind of answer I expected, but at the minimum I expected a straight one, so it was deeply not satisfying to hear Noah say something like, "She buys me stuff when I'm good." Take it from me. Noah must have been very well behaved around his grandma because he brought stuff with him almost every day. But aside from the moral question, the other thing we didn't understand was how his grandma was able to afford all that stuff. From what we could gather, his grandma was at home most of the time, so she didn't seem to have a job. Noah said different guys came over a couple of times a week to give her money, but other than that, he had no idea where she got all of her cash from. I remember my buddies giving each other looks as if to say, "This is the luckiest guy in the universe," but didn't share their thoughts. Instead, I noticed something come over Noah, and afterwards, he went real quiet for a while. I remember how a thought occurred to me while we were all still hanging out.
Seriously.
It was related to Noah's grandma.
Running the car.
I didn't bring it up right there in front of him.
Oh,
But
man.
then on the ride back south, I told my buddies I thought I knew where Noah's grandma was.
I had to try it one more time.
When I told them, they all just laughed at first, thinking I was making a joke or something. But when I told them I thought that Noah's grandma might be a working girl, I was deadly serious. They explained why he was so
There's a
aggressive,
demon
why his grandma
spear.
had so many different guys coming over to give her money. It didn't quite explain why she was buying Noah whiskey and cigarettes, but it explained a lot about herself. It couldn't have been a drugs thing, since we didn't think so. We'd already asked if Noah could get his hands on something stronger than booze, and he told us that that was the one thing his grandma wouldn't allow. Seemed like a weird place to draw a line, but I suppose it had to learn somewhere.
What is this?
We did a lot of speculating that summer, but it was all based on pointless. None of us was going to actually ask if Noah's grandma was a hooker because we didn't want to upset or annoy him with that golden ticket in the process. So, for a while, that was that. Even though we really wanted to know, we told ourselves that Noah
Hey, we're getting closer
business.
each time.
For a while anyway, it stayed that way. All up until
Old
the night
Bay. Old Bay ain't bad.
made
It's
it
not bad.
I remember the night Mom
It's
and
not
Dad
bad at all,
had a
you're
big
right.
fight that I thought it became physical. They were screaming at each other, slamming doors closed, throwing things around, and they were like that for hours. In the end, I just couldn't listen to it anymore.
So,
I remember how warm the summer heat seemed as I walked out the front door and closed it behind me. Quiet, too, so Mom and Dad wouldn't notice. Then I hopped on my bike and rode all the way up to the dog patch, the one place I felt like I wouldn't hear my parents yelling in my head. I rode the 20 minutes or so up to the dog patch, found the secret little entry point that we made by pulling away a few rotten fencing boards, then climbed through into the abandoned park. I start walking across this big field that had the old water slide on the other side of it. And as I get closer, I see this little orange light glow real bright in the darkness for a second, before fading back down again. It was a cigarette. Someone was smoking a cigarette near the old water slide, and I found myself panicked that it was just Noah, and not some psycho killer that's running down to my doom. I called out to the person through the darkness, asking if this is Noah, whom I believe. They called back, yes. It was Noah's voice, all right, but there was something else in there. Something shaky and nasal, like even crying. I walked over to the little concrete pit and sat opposite him, then heard the telltale sniffles of someone who'd been shedding a tear or two. I saw Noah had a cigarette in one hand and a bottle of something in the other. I didn't see what it was, so to speak. I asked him if he was okay. Noah didn't reply. He just took a sip from the bottle, grimaced, then took another drag on the cigarette that he was smoking. Bearing in mind, since Noah was held back a year, he was only 15 years old at the time, but I swear he held that bottle like a man who lived 3 or 4 times as long. He didn't say what was wrong, but I knew that there was something. So I tried to do at least the bare minimum of a friend and tell him something reassuring. I'll always remember saying, "It'll be okay. Whatever it is, it'll all be okay one day." I don't remember those words for their mediocrity, but because of what Noah said in response, or more importantly, how he said it. In reply to me telling him everything will be fine, Noah just replied, "No, it's not." I wanted to tell myself that he was just being cynical, but there was something in the way he told me, "No," that gave me chills. It sounded
So the arrows definitely work.
I tried telling
That's
him
for
about
sure.
how my parents were fighting, how it upset me so bad that I rode out there. But I also told him that no matter how bad they fought sometimes, they'd always get sweet on each other again after a while. He just had to ride it out. But again, his dismissal sounded like that of a condemned man. I tried more talking,
another way.
anything to get him to feel better.
Look, that's the door we're gonna come out
Just
of.
told me to shut up and smoke a cigarette with him in peace. He shuffled up off the concrete for a second so he could slide his hand into the pocket of his jeans. And after he took out a pack of cigarettes, he passed one over along with the lighter. I remember putting the butt in my mouth, but it wasn't until I ignited the lighter that I saw it had blood on it. I let it fall from my lips in shock, only to hear Noah say, "Sorry." I declined
Okay.
and flicked the lighter before scooting down to make sure that I wasn't mistaken. There was a little line on the floor with something that looked a lot like blood fingerprints on the white pavement. But it was something else while I was down there. The thing that had been blind on his feet. I remember asking, "Is that a gun?" But to this day, I don't know why. Maybe because of that reaction, kind of like wishful thinking or something. I asked because I wanted him to tell me no, but he couldn't. Because it was a gun that had been lost in his feet. When I asked him, he was able to pick it up, and I swear that I felt my skin trying to crawl right out of my body. I've been around guns before, even fired them a few times, and I've never been around anyone that had been drunk and emotionally distressed before. The feeling must have caused some kind of slight but definite physical reaction in me, because Noah started to reassure me that the gun wasn't loaded, and that I had nothing to be afraid of. I asked him what he was doing with an unloaded gun, and he just replied, "I'm supposed to pick it up." I remember the horrified feeling of realizing that I had shot somebody, but also this horrible, all-consuming curiosity for who it was that he shot. So after a considerable silence, I finally brought myself to ask him who it had been.
So how can we
He
make
just sighed,
these guys just
then asked me if I remembered what he said about men coming over every few days to give his friend money. I told him I did, then asked him if it was one of those things that he done. Noah just nodded, but then told me that's not why he felt bad. Now, keep in mind, I'm still under the impression that Noah's grandma is some kind of escort, or at least something weird is going on. I'm thinking some guy came over, started beating on his grandma, then Noah snapped and just blew the guy away. I immediately understood why doing something like that would leave a person in the bed, but Noah was still real shaken up on something, in which case, something must have happened to his grandma. It took me a moment or two to figure that out, but when I did, I asked him if the guy he shot was hurting his grandma. I was so sure the answer was going to be yes, that for a second, I wondered why I asked the question in the first place. But Noah didn't say yes. In fact, he shook his head before covering his face with his hand.
Okay.
And the only words I could make out before he burst into tears again was, "I shot my grandma." I couldn't believe what I just heard, and I had to wait until Noah's sobs died down before I asked him if he was serious. There was no way that he could have shot his grandma. There was just no way. I don't think Noah respected her as much as others might respect their grandparents, but he didn't hate her. At least it didn't seem that way. At the time, the only way it could have happened was if the guy was beating on Noah's grandma and he accidentally shot her. And that's the thing about that I only took the consequences especially if he was trying to protect her. And that's when he told me it wasn't an accident.
Oh!
I was so stunned that all I could do was sit back down at the edge of the concrete pit.
Well, hey, I took
I
him with
wouldn't
me.
ask why, but it was like I'd run out of the woods by that point. I didn't say anything, but it was like Noah heard my thoughts because about a minute or so into the silence that followed,
That's gonna work.
he says 5 little words.
That's gonna work.
Well, and why I don't like. He said, "She let me do it." I still didn't quite know what to say. And was still reeling from the news that shooting his own grandma had been an accident. So I didn't really focus on what he said about her letting them do it, whatever that meant. After that, Noah put the bottle down next to himself on the concrete edge of the pit and tossed a pack of cigarettes at me. Then he got up and started walking off back towards the makeshift entry we had going. There was a moment where I was going to ask him if he needed help, but if what he said was true, he was way beyond any help I could offer him. But what I did ask was why he wasn't taking his smokes with him. I don't need them anymore, was all it said. And it disappeared into the dark. Sometime later, I arrived back home, and my parents were furious that I sneaked out so late. They weren't so mad after I told them what Noah had told me. They were too busy getting in touch with the police, and for me, that was the start of a huge scandal that engulfed the whole area for weeks. I don't know what became of Noah. The cops never found him. But the general consensus was that he was just a bad kid who stole his grandma's whiskey, then shot her and her boyfriend. I hadn't put the whole thing together at that point, so that was what I believed too. Years later, when I'm talking well into my college years, I happened to be drinking the same kind of whiskey that Noah had brought for us. All those years earlier on that second day that we hung out together. But as I was sipping it, his words flashed through my mind again. She let me do it. Noah's grandma wasn't making money by selling her body. She was making money by selling things. Christopher Vaughn, his wife Kimberly, and their 3 children packed up their lives in Seattle and drove east to begin a new life in Illinois. Chris had been offered a job at Navigant Consultants Computer Forensics, and since the new role's salary dwarfed what he was making with his own licensed private detective agency, the decision was a no-brainer. For the 2 years that followed the move, Chris and Kimberly led happy lives. The very definition of a prosperous suburban family. But on the morning of June 14, 2007, their world was shattered by an event that has turned prime aficionados for the better part of 15 years. During the week beginning of June 11, 2005, Chris announced that the family would be visiting a water park over in Springfield on the coming Thursday. His children, 12-year-old Abigail, Sandra, and 18-year-old Blake, were established at the Brewers and were unconcerned about the idea of getting up at dawn in order to enjoy a fun-filled day at the amusement park. Then, on the day in question, the Bonds departed their home in Oswego and began a 3-hour drive down to Springfield. However, less than an hour into their journey, the Bonds' car ended up at the side of the road, and it was around 5:15 a.m. The motorist noticed something rather disturbing. Chris Bond was looking away from his vehicle, blood dripping down the lens, when the passing driver asked him what happened. Chris said that he had been shot twice, once through the leg and once through the wrist. Then, when the motorist asked who shot him, Chris simply replied, "I think my wife shot me." After the police arrived, Chris was taken to the hospital while uniformed officers surveyed the scene. The 3 Vaughn children were lying on the backseat of the car. Each of them hadn't sustained fatal gunshot wounds, while Kimberly was slumped over the center console with a single bullet hole under her chin. At her feet lay a 9mm pistol, one later determined to be registered in her husband's name. While being treated at a nearby hospital, Chris appeared to be in a deep state of shock, and said things which suggested that he had no idea that his wife and children had been murdered. Police officers were forced to postpone questioning until Chris was stable in his condition. But when he was finally interviewed, he told them a nightmarish story. Chris told the officers that about 45 minutes into their drive nauseous before asking him to pull over. Chris added that the nausea was a symptom of his wife's migraine, and that she was taking the medications nortriptyline and topamax treatment.
This is
After
punishment.
pulling over to the side of the road, Kimberly remained in her seat while Chris got out of his car to get some fresh air. It was then he noticed that one of the straps of his car topper was a little loose. So, after tightening the strap, Chris climbed back in the driver's seat. Yet just as he sat down, he noticed that his leg was bleeding. After that, his memory of the event grew foggy, and he told officers that he had no memory of being shot at or wounded. In his subsequent interview, when asked if it would be possible that Kimberly was the shooter, Chris stated that was impossible. There's no way she could have hurt the kids, he reportedly said, before adding that she didn't own a firearm. To some, it might seem like Kimberly had shot her husband and children before turning the gun on herself, and that the gaps in Chris's memory were a trauma-induced reaction to the horror of what he witnessed. But to the police, Chris's story didn't wash, and they believe that he was trying to cover up that he was the one who pulled the trigger. To his horror, Chris was arrested a few months after getting to the hospital, and after a lengthy period of detention, was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder. The news was met with horror by the local community, who couldn't believe that such a wholesome-looking man could be capable of such a monstrosity. Public opinion was also flavored by Chris's story that his wife was responsible for the family's destruction, and that his treatment at the hands of police officers was a blatant miscarriage of justice. Yet when he finally was brought to trial in 2012, the prosecution painted a very different portrait of Christopher Vaughn. The prosecution started off by arguing that Chris's version of events did not match the forensic evidence found in the vehicle, and that his wounds showed signs of being self-inflicted. They claimed his apparent amnesia was all a well-thought-out act, one intended to disguise his own guilt, and that an extensive investigation had uncovered a very competent motive. Prosecuting attorneys claimed that Chris had been researching survival methods and had looked up remote places to camp in the Canadian wilderness. They argued that this was either a way of escaping justice after murdering his family, or that Chris harbored some bizarre self-destructive desire to start his life over as some kind of introverted survivalist. Police has also discovered that Chris had been in email contact with someone and had asked them to help him escape his own death. However, this piece of evidence was also used by the prosecution, as the conversation included Chris insisting that his death be faked in a way that allowed his wife to collect on his life insurance. This is so in contrast to what Chris was accused of, but the prosecution produced even more damning evidence over the course of his trial. Investigators had discovered that Chris had been moving under a different strip club and had reportedly spent just less than $5,000 on exotic dancers the week before his family was murdered. 2 of these dancers took the stand at Chris's trial, with one stating that he'd repeatedly told her of his desires to leave his wife before moving to Canada to live in the woods. Another told the court that Chris claimed to be single and without children, evidence of fact that he had designs to abandon his family. Chris's defense tied their argument into his original story, arguing that Kimberly's medication was known to cause thoughts of taking her own life, and had side effects which included intense confusion and agitation. The defense also stated that Chris had recently spoken with his wife regarding the issue of their marriage, and it was possible that she was so distraught that she decided to annihilate her own family. The argument was a compelling one, but it didn't convince the jury, who returned a verdict of guilty after several hours of deliberation. This decision had stunned Chris's close family and friends, who were reeling by the time the judge sentenced him to 4 consecutive life sentences. Chris immediately appealed the conviction and enlisted the help of an expert crime scene investigator by the name of Robert Teal. Teal had personally worked on the case at one stage and asserted that the investigation into the Vaughn family death had been completely mishandled. He stated that there was plenty of forensic evidence to indicate that Kimberly was the shooter, and that at the very minimum, the trajectory of the bullets ruled out any possibility that Chris fired the pistol to the driver's seat. This is a crucial part of the prosecution's argument. Chris had to have been sitting in the driver's seat had taken her own life, there had to be powder burns on her chin to trick investigators into believing the wound was self-inflicted. But Chris wasn't in the driver's seat when the bullets were fired. It cast doubt on the prosecution's version of events, and enough doubt might be enough to force a retrial. Robert Deal also leveled heavy criticism at the homicide detective who worked with him in the case.
Bitch slapped me back where I came from.
I offered up something that was but in some reason why he didn't know what it was. He was assaulted, so he was an investigator during the time of the murder.
Whoa.
He also claimed that the homicide detective seemed overly fixated on the prospect of Chris being the killer, and seems unwilling to even contemplate the idea that a mother had murdered her own children. In their eyes, it also fell back on that Christopher Vaughn, Deal said. They thought he was some kind of criminal mastermind who knew all about crime scenes, and that he was trying to fool me into thinking that something else happened. But Robert Deal was no amateur, and he has vehemently denied having misinterpreted the forensic evidence. The detectives kept changing, trying to make the evidence fit their theory, Deal added, instead of letting the evidence dictate to you the events that occurred. In great detail, Robert Deal explained why it was in fact the prosecution that had misinterpreted the evidence. The state's attorney had Christopher unbuckle his wife's seatbelt before he shot her, when in reality, a large blood stain was found at the point where the latch came together. Since the blood belonged to Chris, this would mean that Kimberly had unbuckled the seatbelt after Christopher was shot, at which point it throws serious doubt on the prosecution's case. Following Chris's conviction, an email had come to light which seems to back up the idea that Kimberly's medication was having some horribly adverse effects on her. The email, which was composed by Kimberly herself, states that she was experiencing a huge upsurge of anxiety in the weeks before her death. This could well be down to the amount of nortriptyline that she was taking, as during her autopsy, it was discovered that she had toxic levels of it in her system. Chris's defense lawyers have since cited an FDA study which reports that people taking nortriptyline are at a statistically significant risk of taking their own lives, and that a clinical psychiatrist believed it entirely possible that Chris had been suffering from dissociative amnesia brought on by witnessing a traumatic event. Such compelling evidence of wrongful conviction has since spurred the conviction advocacy group investigating innocence to champion Chris's cause, and a crowdfunding campaign has raised a sizable amount to fund his legal expenses. If indeed the defense has as compelling an argument as they claim, there's a very real possibility that Chris Vaughn's conviction is soon to be overturned. At the very minimum, he'll be granted a retrial, but doing so will no doubt dredge up some very painful questions for all concerned. What was it that destroyed the Vaughn family? Was it the selfish destructiveness of a neglectful father? Or was it the hellish fury of a woman scorned?
Don't wait. Redeem Wawa rewards for $1 hot coffee, $2 iced coffee, and $3 Monster Energy.
Over 3,000 styles starting at $6 and find your perfect pair or two. Shop now at iBuyDirect.com.
On the morning of September 26, 2011, construction workers arrived at the site of the former cement factory just north of St. Louis, Missouri. For many of them, the project they were faced with was the most unusual of their entire careers, as they were tasked with creating a very unconventional kind of amusement park, one simply named Cement Land. Cement Land was the brainchild of a man named Bob Casilli, an eccentric but highly successful entrepreneur who played a central role in the revitalization of downtown St. Louis. He envisioned Cement Land as a kind of brutalist art installation turned amusement park, one with
We're gonna
picture
try it
giant
one more
concrete
time.
sculptures, the rusting skeletons of obsolete
One more
machinery,
time.
and even an
And if we
artificial
fail,
river large enough to accommodate small boats.
we fail.
Casilli proved to be an
But
exacting
this
task
is
for
it.
Mr.
This is
McLean.
it. We're gonna
Earn the respect
try
of the
one more
construction
time.
crews by pouring his own
If not,
blood,
that's
sweat,
it.
and tears into the project. He sometimes slept overnight from the unfinished job site, and after long days of backbreaking work, Bob would carry on
I gotta
working
get
long
the timing right when I run up there.
So, on the morning of September 25th, when the construction crew spotted Bob's truck and an unlocked job site, they simply assumed that he'd started work early that day. Yet as they walked onto the site, they were greeted by a dead silence that hung thick in the air. Construction work is nothing but noise, and to hear a silent job site that's as rare is disconcerting. So, after clocking in and filling up their coffee flasks, the construction workers fanned out over the job site to search for Bob Casilli. After just a few minutes of searching, one of the workers cried out in alarm. After rushing to his location, the remaining construction workers were greeted by a horrifying sight. One of the site's bulldozers was lying on its side at the bottom of the steep slope, and lying slumped over in his cab, covered in blood, was Bob Casilli. The workers immediately contacted 911, but sadly, EMTs discovered that Bob had passed away as a result of his injuries just a few hours earlier. Attending police officers initially believed that Bob had died as a result of an accident, one that involved his bulldozer rolling down the steep hill, which had been working, crushing all his ribs and causing severe head trauma in the process. But although St. Louis Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Michael Graham confirmed this cause of death in his autopsy report, he couldn't be certain that Bob had actually been in the cab of the bulldozer when it had tumbled down the hill. Officially speaking, the police ruled Bob's death an accident, but over the weeks that followed, Bob's widow began to insist that her husband was murdered, and that his death had been staged to appear accidental. This theory was supported by a physician, Dr. Arthur Cohen, who reported that Bob's death was marked as accident. In his expert opinion, only a sustained and vicious impact of a blunt object could have caused such mortal wounds. Third eye by the doctor's professional opinion, Dear Mama Casilli began conducting her own investigation into her husband's death, and in the process, discovered something deeply disturbing. She cited an article from St. Louis's Riverfront Times that stated that fatal bulldozer rollings are astonishingly rare. A study surveying mining accidents from 1988 to 1997 found just 14 fatalities related to rollovers, and in every single case, the victim was either thrown from the vehicle, asphyxiated, or drowned. Not one was found inside the cab with a fractured skull. The survey cited an astonishing number of bulldozer accidents, and in almost every single case of death by head trauma, the deceased had neglected to wear their seatbelt. Police argued that Bob hadn't been wearing his seatbelt until his body was found, but to his widow, this was further evidence that he had been murdered. She stated that her husband was extremely safety conscious, and would never have gotten into a bulldozer without following the proper protocol. Once Dr. Cohen obtained a copy of Bob's autopsy report, he was able to more accurately articulate why he was so suspicious.
Too soon.
First, perhaps the most significant Dr. Cohen's point was that several bones in Bob's hands were broken. To him, these were textbook defensive injuries, wounds which had been sustained as he attempted to defend himself from his mysterious attackers.
Alright, man, I'm gonna call it, at least for a little bit here.
Dr. Cohen
It was
stated
fun, though.
that he was present in the cab during his fall. The source of these wounds should have been obvious. The doctor also pointed out that the ribs on both sides of Bob's torso